Hello, everyone. Welcome to Garden House Studio. Today, we are finishing up a thrift flip, which we started, I guess, maybe 2 weeks ago. And we're also introducing a couple other new projects, like these clipboards with those beautiful floral transfers on them. So the first thing we are going to work on, I don't know if you remember this from our original photo of our thrift flips, but this is one of those little candy boxes. It was probably painted, and everyone loved it, but now it's time to change it around. And because those red, I don't know if they're cherries or tomatoes or whatever they are, but they're raised up. They've got a bunch of texture. The paint was real thick there. We're going to sand that down and just give it some tooth. I am using a primer that will stick to this from Pentart, and we don't have to go do too much sanding. So I sanded a little bit. I'm going to wipe it back, and then I am using a product called Bonding Primer from Pentart, and it really does stick. So the Pentart Bonding Primer is white, and it is just a little bit glossy, but it also takes a while to dry, so I'm going to leave it overnight to dry thoroughly. Now that the primer is dry, I am painting the full piece with a 1 hour enamel from Wise Owl Paint, and the color I'm using is called Higgins Lake. It's a really pretty soft turquoise, and I'm going to give it 2 coats of this paint and let it dry quite a while in between coats. Once my paint is thoroughly dry, it's time to put on a transfer. And for this little candy box, I am using the Seed Catalog transfer from IOD. It's 8 pages of different seed packages and catalogs. And I am using the one, let's see which one I'm going to use. I am going to use one of the smaller transfers. Some of them are full page and some of them are half a page, but I'm using this one, which has some typography on it. It has some really pretty clematis on it. And this is the one I'm going to cut apart and make it fit where I need it to be on the top of my candy box. One of the great things about the transfers is you can cut them apart. You can move the typography where you need it to be. And I do not want this transfer to go over the edges. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off the part that would have gone over the edge and the typography on the top. And I am just going to reassemble that to the right of the florals and have it fit perfectly on the top of my lid. Because the 1 hour enamel has a built-in top coat, the transfer goes on perfectly. Just burnish it right on, no problem, comes right off. I was able to use all of the typography except for one little word, the guide word, and one little flower. And I went ahead and put those in my art journal. So pretty much by just cutting it up and moving it around, I was able to save this whole design and put it on the top. I keep moving them and cutting the little pieces to get them all to fit, but not just to get them to fit, but get them to look like naturally they would be there. So that's what makes it a little trickier. These candy boxes make really great little keepsake boxes, jewelry boxes, and they are not hard to find. They seem to have really survived really well. I can see them in thrift stores all the time. But they are perfect little gift boxes. So if you see them, grab them because they make great gifts and they are easily painted and easily transformed into something really pretty, just like this box was. And once I had all the transfer parts down, I top coated the design and left it to dry, and then it was ready to go for sale. And now for the next project. For this project, I am using clipboards, and these are new clipboards. I get them on Amazon, and I am again going ahead and using a bonding primer as my first coat on the clipboards. I don't want them to ripple at all, so I go ahead and put a bonding primer on first. And I'm doing two of them, and I'm going to paint them both at the same time. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use that Higgins Lake again because I really think it's just the best, freshest spring color for these clipboards, and perfect for a gift for Mother's Day or a wedding or anything that happens in the spring. I am planning to stamp a background on these two clipboards and then add some of the big flowers from the Collage des Fleurs, which is a transfer with big giant flowers that came out from IOD in the spring release. On the first clipboard, I am using the stamp Kindness Regards, which is a script I'm using as my background. I am using black IOD ink, and I am just going to ink it up and stamp it onto this clipboard, and then I'm going to let it dry. Now, the clipboard has a top coat on it, and it's a little bit glossy, so I'm going to be really careful when I lift it up that I don't smudge the ink, and then totally let it dry before I come back and do any of the burnishing of the transfer. I am using the Transfer Collage des Fleurs for the clipboards for both of them. And these are very large florals. There's roses, there's peonies, there's tulips, there's forget-me-nots, really nice ivy. And they make a beautiful collage, or even what I would call a swag, which is what we're going to kind of do, make a little arrangement. So my ink is totally dry and I am ready to do some transferring. So the first thing I'm putting down is the ivy. It just kind of sets the design. I have an idea of how I want the design to come out. So I am just kind of making it a little bit wispy, but only the ivy is wispy. The other flowers are just huge and just so grand. But I'm going to put a big flower in that corner, so it's going to cover up those ends. So I just keep adding, just keep moving them around till I like the way it looks. You do not need too many flowers when the flowers are this big. I don't want to cover up that whole flower, and if I had left those leaves on, it would have covered up the flower just a little too much. So I took some of the leaves off. And even when I arrange flowers, it's exactly the same as here. I just keep putting them down till it looks right and is pleasing to my eye. I try to get the scale right. In other words, I don't want all big pieces. I want to vary the size of the flowers. I love greenery. That's why I love the ivy. I like to have greenery on my florals. And I really like those blues. I call them little forget-me-nots, but it's probably not what they are. But they're so cute. So I decided to put some of the blue there. And again, just cut off what you think is you need. I don't want to have that stem too long, so I cut the stem, and then I have the stem look like it's coming out from behind the roses. Super fun doing arrangements with the transfers. And you'll know when you get it right. So I'm balancing the top with the bottom by putting some of the blue at the bottom also. Plus, it makes it look a little bit more wispy and not so much just one big giant flower there. And it's done. The next thing I did was put a top coat on it, let it dry, and it's totally done. The second clipboard is done exactly the same way. I'm using a different stamp. I'm using the Le Courrier, which is a newspaper, um, a French newspaper. And I'm just gonna, same thing, black ink, stamp it to the background. Now you'll notice this one gets a little smudged because somehow or other, when I was stamping that corner, it went under, it slipped and went underneath the actual clip. So it's a little smudgy there, but it doesn't matter because most of it gets covered up. We are making this one as a mirror image to the other one and putting the flowers on the right-hand side and not on the left. Lake Courier is one of my favorite stamps for backgrounds when we're doing art journaling, and just it makes a perfect background. I am going to add the transfers exactly the same as I did on the first clipboard. I'm just taking a couple of the big flowers and a bunch of the smaller ones and going to vary the size. Also taking a little more of the ivy for this one. And you'll see I'm going to go pretty quickly through putting this together. But there's a couple things that I do a little bit different. And I would like to show you those if you ever get stuck and can't quite fit your whole flower on something, how to solve that when you really want to have the leaves coming out the bottom. So I'm going to cut this piece of ivy in half, and what you want to do is make sure that the tips, that part that's showing at the very end, doesn't just have a stem with no leaves connected. So I get pretty close to the leaves at the very end. And again, a lot of that is covered because these flowers are so big, and we're going to put a big giant rose there. But the ivy really makes it look swaggy, a little bit wispy. So I want to use these leaves, but in order to put that whole leaf in there, I would have it up way too high. So what I am doing is I'm actually going to burnish the leaves down first, and then I'm going to overlap the flower. So you're just going to see a little tip of the leaf sticking out instead of having a big leaf and not be able to put that flower as far down as you need to. These big giant garden roses are so beautiful. They just create such a romantic look. And I added a little more ivy to this one. I popped a tulip in there, cutting some of the leaf and the stem off to make it fit in there. I did concentrate a lot on putting a bunch of red in it. I love the contrast of red with this soft turquoise. The tulip is really a very straight flowers, so I wanted to cover up some of that and kind of make it look a little bit more natural in this arrangement. So I covered up the end of it, and later on I put another little green leaf on it, and it just makes it look a little more natural. There's a lot more flowers on this clipboard than there were on the first one that I made. A little more ivy. Much more of a flower arrangement. But these flowers are just gorgeous. And there they are, done. Our next project is a recycled sign. I did this sign several years ago. I was using all the different typography stamps from IOD, and now it's time to erase it. So what we are doing is sanding it down. It's going to have some bleed through, and I'm not really worried about that because it's really part of a super grungy look that I'm looking for. So we sanded it down, and then I did a coat of white chalk paint over it. And once that was done, I was ready to start stamping. Starting my stamping with La Campagne, and I am using the big rooster from that stamp. I've put a little mark in the middle of the board, which you can't really see, to center my rooster, and he is the first thing I am doing. I am going to be using some masking over him when I put the wreath around it. So I want him to be nice and clear. I'm using a black ink and ready to stamp. Getting him centered and then pressing him down. Now there's so much detail in these stamps, so you'll see I take a lot of time pressing down all the edges, all the places where the detail is just, it's just amazing how detailed these stamps are. But that's my rooster, and he is the center of my design. This board was actually either a door or a tabletop. I can't really tell, but it is pretty thick and it is oak. So the next thing I want to put over this rooster is I want to have that wreath that comes from the mercantile stamp. It's a big wreath and it's part of, it really looks like a grain sack design. So I am taking all the small stamps off of the back there because I want to keep that big wreath. I want to keep it attached to the sheet that it came on. And now I am getting out the mask for this rooster. And I'm going to put the mask right over him. There it is. So that when I put a stamp down on the wreath, it doesn't go over him. So here's the wreath. It's all inked up. And again, I'm pushing down as hard as I can, holding on to one part of the stamp so that it doesn't move, and pushing the rest of the stamp into the wood. There's quite a bit of texture on this wood already, so I'm really trying to get a good impression. And there it is. And quite often the mask stays attached to whatever the stamp is that you just stamped over it. Now I want to put the stripes from the mercantile on either side of this design. And so that is a 2-inch wide ruler that I am using to hold the spot because I didn't want to put lines or anything on it. So I am going to take the stripe stamp and line it up along the side of that ruler, and that'll give me 2 inches. And there's a lot of texture on this stamp. It almost looks like it's fabric when you stamp it. And I will tell you that I stamped over this stripe 3 times. I re-inked it and went over it to get that very deep blue. And and also get rid of the places where you could see where the stamp ended, and I started again. And it is China blue. And then I went ahead and I stamped the quality over the design and the grains at the bottom, the number 7. These are all part of the mercantile stamp and the year. So now it looks just like a pillow of some kind. But the next thing I did is I wanted to get some crackle on this piece. So I have classic Crackle from Pentart. And once all of that ink was dry, and I waited for it to be totally dry because there was a lot of blue ink there, I used step 1 of the Crackle and I painted it all over the top. So it's a 2-step Crackle. No smearing at all of the ink. And that is IOD China Blue ink. It is a little tacky, so it's kind of hard to get it and know you've gotten the whole thing because the actual step 1 is pretty tacky. You have to wait till step 1 is totally dry before you do step 2. So I let it dry overnight. And then I came in with the step 2, which is kind of like a varnish. It's clear. It's not like paste, which is step 1 is. And then I waited. So here you see the design with step 2 over it. It's made it very shiny. And now I am just waiting to see the magic happen. And here is the Crackle. You can't really see it yet, but once we put the dark antiquing wax over it, you can see the Crackle really well. And I am just going to use a antiquing wax. The first wax I used was Wise Owl black wax, and it is a combination of waxes, and it also has hemp oil in it. And then I used some Pentart antiquing wax also, and together they brought out the detail of the Crackle. I'm just using a cloth and rubbing it in to the places where the Crackle is. I actually put wax all over the whole thing just to kind of blend it in. And hopefully you can see the Crackle on the screen. It adds so much to this design. And that is the finishing touch for this recycled sign. I hope you've enjoyed this video of upcycled and new projects. And if you have ever stamped and you'd like to learn about using masks in your stamping, I have a video on YouTube of all just how to use the masks to create designs that look a little more professional. All of the supplies that we've used are listed in the description. And here's just a few more pictures of up close with the Crackle. Really gives it an aged look. That is the classic Crackle from Pentart. It is a 2-step Crackle.